I really warmly welcome Miriam and Arosha. You're, I think, very well-known academics in the OU, but today you're particularly talking about an issue I think for me is very close to my heart, and not just because there's a design in the title of your session, Safe by Design, Technologies for Protecting Women Online, but also because I'm mother to a 13-year-old daughter who I think would really, really benefit from being safer online, and we can't avoid young girls going online and being unsafe. So I am so grateful for having you, and I'm extremely excited, and I'm really looking forward to your session. So welcome, and please.
Thank you very much, Nicole, and thank you everyone for being here. It's great to have this opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing in the context of the Center for Protecting Women Online. I'll say a little bit more about the center in a moment, but as you've heard, I'm Arosha Bandara. I'm a professor of software engineering at the Open University, and I lead one of the work streams to do with the future of responsible technology. Before we start, I just do want to highlight that online safety and violence against women online, we recognize this is a sensitive topic and could be distressing for some at times. So just to raise your awareness that we will be talking about some of those incidences and examples of violence online. And if you need to get some additional support or step away, we understand, and please do what you need to protect yourself and keep safe. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Miri to introduce herself, and then we'll make a start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miriam Fernandez. I'm a professor of responsible AI, and I lead the stream of responsible AI at the center. As you know, this is a beautiful initiative that is based here at the OU. So we hope to give you a bit of an overview of what we're doing, and that you can see a little bit more of the research. And if you want to join any of the research that we are doing, we will be delighted to have you.
Thanks, Mary. So to start with, we wanted to talk a little bit about the context and kind of define some of the terms that we're using, because our center focuses on online violence against women and girls. Sometimes this is also called technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. We base this work on some definitions that come, for example, from this UN Special Rapporteur report about what is meant by violence against women being gender-based acts of violence that could have physical, sexual, psychological, harmful effects to women, but include things like coercion and loss of liberty. And it doesn't matter if that happens in public or private life. These are all acts of violence against women. And the online aspect is characterized by these acts being facilitated or aggravated by the use of information and communication technologies in the various forms they take. And this kind of reflects that women, all of us, including women, inhabit online spaces that are kind of personal and direct, like an email inbox or a direct messaging inbox that's just for them. But then they're also part of online communities. And then there's the whole kind of wider world of the World Wide Web and internet and information systems that are out there. And the nature of online violence is not restricted to any one of these domains, that the perpetrators of this violence target women in their personal digital spaces, in the community spaces that they occupy, as well as through the wider web by creating an environment of hostility, misogynistic hostility through the content that they create and post. And to give a bit more context, so the center that Miri and I are part of started its journey as one of the Open University's Open Societal Challenges projects. And our colleague and director of the center, Professor Olga Uras, conducted the largest study of online violence against women and girls in the UK, maybe even globally, actually. So that was conducted in 2023, and 7,500 adults were surveyed. And these are some of the headline findings: that in England, more than 1 in 10 women have experienced online violence. 30% have witnessed online violence. 68% think that current legislation is not effective at tackling online violence. This is in the context before the Online Safety Act was law. The Online Safety Act was being debated at the time this survey was done. It would be interesting to see if awareness of that law has changed that percentage in any way. But then moving through some of the headline findings, 1 in 8 women who experienced online violence say that this progressed to offline violence or violence in the physical world. So that's also important to recognize that even though our focus is online violence, we recognize that it doesn't limit itself to one domain. It can move between the online and physical world as well. And some of the perceptions of why people commit violence against women and girls, respondents highlighted concerns like anonymity, the ease of getting away with it, as in the lack of accountability, and general misogyny. And the other thing to highlight is that violence against women and girls is not just about gender. It has an intersectionality to it. And this is an area that Miri and her student Joseph Kwarteng have been looking at by studying this phenomena of misogynoir online, how Black women experience misogyny online, and some of the underlying characteristics of that and causes of that and so on. So it's important to recognize that this isn't just about gender as well. So it's in this context that we applied for and secured funding from Research England to create the Centre for Protecting Women Online. And it is recognizing the need that we need to take a cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral perspective in order to address this significant challenge. So we were able to secure over £7.5 million from Research England for setting up and getting the centre up and running over the next 5 to 6 years. We've just, well, not so recent anymore, 6 months ago, in August 2024 is when we formally started operating. And our ethos is very much about being open, externally facing, and collaborative. And so echoing what Miri said, based on what you hear today or what you learn about the centre, we are very keen to hear from people who'd like to collaborate with us and work with us to further this research. So here's the kind of broad context of the centre, that we're organized into 5 main work streams. So we have law, policy, and regulation as one of these work streams that's led by our colleague Xenia, together with the centre director, Olga Uraz. Policing is another work stream led by Keely Dudden from the School of Law as well. And then ethical and responsible technology and AI. Miriam will talk more about that, but that's the work stream she leads together with Angel. I saw Angel somewhere on the call as well. So welcome. Great to see you here, Angel. And then finally, sorry, not finally, but the next, the future of responsible technology. So this is the work stream I lead together with my colleague Min Zhang, who is based in the School of Computing and Communications. And we also have a human behavior work stream led by a team, excuse me, a team of social psychologists, Professor Rose Capdevia, Lisa Lazard, and Nelly, and currently we have Catherine Guilfoyle with us as well in that team. And then we also have the great support of a professional services team, so a centre manager, an external engagement manager, and a coordinator in Joanna, Helen, and Michelle. So I'm going to hand over to Miri now to talk about the work that she's leading on together with Angel in this area of ethical and responsible technology and AI. Over to you.
So hi everyone. I'm just gonna give a big overview of the type of things that Angel and I are doing in the stream. Can I take control? Oh, right. So I don't know if you have ever looked into the incident database AI. It's an interesting database in which you can see what are the incidents that have been derived from AI, from problems with cars, self-driving cars who have run over people, to issues, with the new generative AI technologies and so on and so forth. So I did a quick search, just about incidents related with women. You can see everything that is pulled from that database. But, I just wanted to highlight 4 cases that you can see in here. So, for example, women lawmakers are 70 times more likely to be victims of deep fake porn. And we know this is not just lawmakers, is women that are, women politicians, women journalists. They get much more hate online, and they are much more times the targets of hate. You have issues like deep fake bots being used to undress underage girls, but this is not just underage girls, it's also women of all ages. And this is something that sometimes is used as well for revenge porn. So they are manipulating images and then distributing images as a way of, courting women. Then you have elections, right? So when elections happen and big decisions need to be taken, then there is always women voices that are silent, right? So you have things like the deep fakes going in Korea ahead of elections, particularly affecting women. And then obviously you have issues with bias, right, and discrimination. So one of these key or more well-known was the case of Amazon. Amazon had this tool for recruitment, and then this tool was trained on biased data, particularly when it came to hire on technical positions. Then obviously, because societies are biased, historical data is biased. If you are not careful when you train these algorithms, they can amplify those biases, right? So the algorithm learned that if the words women or something related with women was in the CV, that means that it will rate those CVs lower. And similar things have happened in LinkedIn and other places where higher paid jobs were offered to men and not to women, right? So there are quite a lot of issues with the technologies that we currently have. And then, how we deal with these issues, how we ensure that we put a lens in the existing technologies that help to see problems from a women perspective and from other minority perspective. So this is just to give you an overview of the type of problems that existing technology can bring. Right. One of the first things, because we have been looking into issues for a long time. So the center started in 2024, but we have been looking at, lots of things for a number of years. So I just wanted to give in this talk a bit of an overview of this work. So the first big piece of work we did was studying the manosphere. Any of you who doesn't know what the incel communities are? You guys know, all of you know? Okay, so for those of you who doesn't know, the incel communities are these communities. They actually started as people who wanted support, men's rights, right? Men's complaining about, cases of divorce and other things. And it derived into communities that are extremely hateful against women and other minorities. So they basically they blame women for everything. They blame women for them not having relationships. They blame women for them not having a job, etc., etc. The issue with these communities, the main issue is that they have become more and more violent over the years, up to the point that they have committed multiple terrorist attacks. So they have been, shootings related with these communities. and other events in which obviously women have been targeted. One of the things that we wanted to study is, okay, let's see what is the overview of these communities. The first big piece that we did was to let's see how these communities have evolved over the years, and let's see if it's, which type of hate, are emerging from these communities. So in collaboration with Tracy Farrell, which I'm sure most of you know, we developed a big lexicon on misogyny, so from the literature of feminist scholars, different types of misogynistic hate, from patriarchism, belittling, sexual harassment, and so on and so forth. And what we did, we took millions of posts from these communities, and then we saw which type of hate were emerging. What we observe, just as a big summary, because there are many, many things that we observe, but I think there are two things that are worth highlighting. One is that the hate was becoming more and more higher in quantity and higher in aggressivity, right? The second thing that we observe is the perpetrator behavior, right? So we saw that there was a lot of mental health issues behind these communities, right? And it is interesting because, it's not just that these communities exist, but these communities exist and they attract more and more people. And how they attract these people? So they deal with the fact that people feel isolated, they may be depressed, then they gave them a home, they gave them a voice, but this is a very hateful voice, right? So how we can counter what these communities, are doing, which type of programs we can put in place, to make sure that these men that are in this community do not get radicalized, are things to think about. I don't have obviously a solution for this, but this is something that we should really, think about educational programs, about integration programs, on how to be able to make sure these men do not end up men that might feel isolated, might feel depressed, do not end up being targets of these communities, right? The other big piece that we did was on trying to understand the vocabulary, because if you go to these communities, you will see a lot of terms that do not exist in any dictionary, right? Not even urban dictionaries, because they have their own realities about what a woman is, sexuality, and so on and so forth. So in this piece of work, we use word embeddings to try to identify. I don't want to mention any of the words here because they are they can be quite upsetting, but you can go and read the papers. They are there if you are interested. But what we did is that we use word embeddings to try to see which other words co-occur with words that did not appear in any of dictionary, as a way to try to understand the meaning. And I think it's very important to do that because, as I say, these people live in their own realities. So if you want to counter these realities, you need to understand them, right? So this is the second big piece of work that we did in here. Another piece of work that was led by one of my ex-PhD students, now doctor, he graduated this year, Joseph, was studying misogynoir, right? Misogynoir is the particular hate that targets Black women. And you might say like, oh, how is this different, right? So it has components of misogyny and it has components of race. And it's not trivial to identify this. So one of the pieces of work that we did in this study is to look at existing hate speech detection systems, automated hate speech detection systems. And one of the primary things that we observe is that when you have systems that, there might be systems that are good at identifying misogyny, and there might be systems that are good at identifying race. But when you compound these things together, these same systems, like the Perspective API and others, were not very good at identifying misogynoir. And this is a problem, right? Because then existing systems that might be helpful to keep white women safe, they are not helpful to keep Black women safe, right? So how we can modify these how can we modify these systems to be able to understand the subtleties of this specific type of hate. So one of the things that Joseph did as well as part of this work, he did a big annotation study in which he used 4 types of annotators. He used Black men, Black women, white men, and white women to annotate exactly the same content, right? Because one of the issues that we have when we develop these automated systems to recognize hate is that these systems are based on training data, right? So if the annotations of that data are not good enough, the systems are gonna learn and are gonna learn wrong, right? Hate is very contested, and this is a problem, and that we know that when you develop hate speech detection systems, annotators many times don't even agree, right? And we know that. But what Joseph did is to see how these 4 groups diverse on had different opinions and when annotating the same content. So one of the things that he observed is that, of course, the life experiences influence on how you annotate content. So if you are a Black woman, you are able to identify certain type of hate, right? That maybe a white woman won't be able to identify, or a white man won't be able to identify, right? Or even a Black man won't be able to identify, which comes into the idea that when we develop these systems, we really need to make sure that we bring diversity in the set of annotations that are used to create these systems, right? And this has happened to us over and over. So we did another study. This was with radical content some time ago. And we asked people in different, so in North America, South America, Middle East, Africa, and Asia to annotate the same content. This was non-radical content. So when North America, everyone said that this content was radical. In Africa, most people said that the same content was not radical. So there is an issue on culture and what culture perceives as misogyny and what culture perceives as xenophobic content, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it's very difficult to create, because we don't have standards of what is hateful. It is very difficult as well to create systems to control for that. And the problem is that right now, most of the control is on the tech companies because there is no common definitions. They have the power to decide what stays and what goes, right? And this is a big problem for us to consider. And that's what is great that we are part of the Center for Protecting Women Online, because we have Olga and her team working on law and practice, and we have lots of connections with organizations that can help us to try to see how we can target that from a policy making point of view. Okay, so the other piece of work that I wanted to talk about, this one is from Paula, another ex-PhD student of mine that is now again a doctor, recently graduated. So this is again in the same line of understanding hate. This is not between hate and race. This is between hate and sexual orientation. But anyway, the whole idea, when we did this first annotation with Joseph and we saw how different groups differ in their annotations, we thought maybe people don't know, right? Because if you are not from a target group, there are maybe words that you have never heard, you don't even know what they mean. And then when you see a piece of content, you think the piece of content is okay, but it's just because you don't know what really means, right? So one of the things that we did was, okay, let's get the same annotators, and we first ask them to annotate content. In this case, we have men, women, and then we have different sexual orientations within both the category of men and women. So cisgender, transgender, and so on and so forth. And then we gave them the content to annotate, and then 2 weeks later, we gave them the same content, but with definitions, right? So we'll tell them like, okay, chevrons, what chevrons means. This is a derogatory term to refer to Black women. or this other word means X and Y, right? So they could see in the system what each of the words means. So things that we observe when doing that, when giving annotators definitions, is that their agreement increase, and not just that. Overall, the agreement increase with the target group, right? So that gives you also the idea that it's not only important to bring diversity on the annotation, is that you also need to make sure that when people annotate, they understand what they are annotating. So giving them support in the sense of dictionaries or urban dictionaries or conceptualizations of these terms is useful for them to put themselves in the position of the target groups and be more aligned with the type of content they annotate, right? Finally, the last piece of work that I wanted to talk about is Angel's PhD. Again, another recently graduated PhD of mine. I had the nest full and now the nest is empty, which is great because they are all fantastic and they have all fly this year. So he has been looking at bias in financial systems, right? So as you know, bias exists. I gave the case of Amazon, but the case of Apple was very well known as well, in which it will be at the same level of, earnings and properties and so on and so forth. It will give more credit to men than to women, right? So that was very contested. That was a case that was very contested and so on and so forth. But in general, again, because traditionally some of the systems have been annotated with, biased data, they not just perpetuate, but sometimes even amplify that data, right? And you have several bias identification and bias mitigation mechanisms. One of the most common bias mitigation mechanisms is what is called fairness through unawareness, meaning I remove the attribute, the sensitive attribute. In this case, I remove the females, right? And then I think my algorithm is going to be fair because my algorithm is not going to see whether, this person is a male or a female. But what in reality happens is that there are other attributes that can be a proxy for the sensitive attribute. So, for example, imagine that most males own a house and most females rent a house. Imagine that most females work part-time and most males work full-time, right? Then, even if you remove female male out of the list of attributes, owning a car, owning a house, or working part-time can be proxies, right? And therefore, you are still perpetuating and you're still discriminating. So one of the things that Angel has been working on is how can we ensure that we remove the minimum amount of information from all the list of attributes that we have to train these systems to ensure that once the algorithm is trained, it's not unfair or the unfairness has reduced, right? Another important thing that he has been working on is on fairness definitions and how we combine them, because that's the other issue, right? Like computationally, there are, many different metrics and so on, but it depends on what you mean by being fair, right? So you could say, okay, for me, fair is that the same amount of women and the same amount of men are given a loan, right? So if there is like 100 people, maybe 20 male and 20 female should be given a loan, right? That could be your definition of fairness. Then other people could say no, because we are, looking into errors. So the algorithm should not make errors or should make the same amount of errors for males and females, but that doesn't mean that it will give the same amount of loans to everybody, right? So there are different definitions of fairness, and we know that some of them contradict each other. So Angel has been also working on how to combine these fairness definitions and fairness mitigation methods to try to satisfy multiple fairness metrics. And, again, this is the last piece of work that I wanted to talk about. But in general, this is the type of work that we are doing in the center. So looking at existing AI technologies, how are impacting women, and what can we do to make these technologies better, fairer, less damaging for women, and so on and so forth.
Thanks very much, Mary. Really great. Yeah, and I think it sets up that really clear context about the role of these AI machine learning technologies as sources of problems of gender bias and misogyny, as we've seen in the algorithmic bias examples you've shown, but also the role they play in properly trained, properly configured in being part of the solution by developing techniques of detecting these types of misogyny. Clearly lots of challenges to be addressed there, and looking forward to seeing how the work develops to address those challenges in the context of the center. So now I'm going to take on the role of explaining a bit about that broader picture in which these AI technologies that Mary has been talking about sits within systems, information systems or software-based systems, to understand how do we move towards a safe by design approach for these technologies that are implicated in online violence against women and girls. How do we make women feel safer and protected online? And so this is work I've been involved in together with my colleague Min Zhang and other colleagues in the School of Computing and Communications and beyond. I wanted to share a bit of an example scenario to give you a context in how these harms arise and these problems arise in the context of the development and deployment and use of software-based systems. So in this example, I'm presenting the idea of a team developing an online learning platform. So we have some developers, and this team includes students and tutors as key stakeholders. So they're trying to adopt good practice of involving all relevant and key stakeholders in this process, and also diverse stakeholder communities as well. So, and through the exercise and as they go through this process, these stakeholders raise a concern that this platform could be used to post harmful content that targets women and girls and causes distress. And in this particular scenario, the developers and the team collectively talk about this and decide, well, but because all students and tutors will be identifiable on the platform, this is likely to be a very low risk. If people know that they can be held accountable, then they're unlikely to post this type of content. And so they choose to continue to develop the system as planned and don't really put in place any particular mitigations other than ensuring that everyone is identifiable in their posts on the platform. So the platform is deployed and is being used, and after some time, the tutors say, we'd like some help, please, because we need to be able to produce diagrams to support our explanations to students. And so they ask for this feature enhancement from the team. And the developers do a bit of investigation and say, oh, yes, we could do that. We could add a generative AI tool that supports this. So if you give a description of the diagram you're trying to describe, trying to present to the students, we can help, the tool will generate this. So, and they accept this, and so they add this generative artificial intelligence capability to the online learning platform. And once this is deployed and used, the tutors and students say, oh, but we've noticed that this tool, it generates diagrams that always depict men as the scientists when we talk about diagrams that include representations of scientists. And the team say, oh, actually, we didn't realize that the training data for this tool was biased and didn't actually address that gender bias concern. So they do some more research and find a tool that has been trained with better training data and has some safeguards in place, and they update the Gen AI tool and redeploy the platform for use. And then after some time, a student raises a complaint that says, my tutor posted an explicit image. It was deleted later, but was very upsetting, and I want to complain. And the tutor says, well, that image was generated when I asked for a diagram to help illustrate the concept of asexual reproduction. And I had hit post before I realized that the diagram was inappropriate. And as soon as I realized it was inappropriate, I deleted it. Now, when the software engineers asked about this, they do some investigation and realize that the tool that they embedded was updated by the developers. And when they pulled in that update and released a new version of the platform, the Gen AI tool developers had changed the way it was configured. They had changed the guardrails being on by default to being configurable and needing to be explicitly set up in order to prevent these type of images from being generated. Now, this whole process, would have led to an investigation being conducted because of the nature of the complaint, and under the current UK's Online Safety Act, the tutor could be suspended while the investigation is carried out, because they have possibly committed a crime by generating and sharing an image of this nature. And so this is, psychological and financial harm to the tutor. And also for the platform provider, they would be asked by the regulator to demonstrate how they adopted a safe by design approach. This is something that the legislation kind of sets out as an expectation. But the developers really don't have a good documentation and a way of demonstrating this. And so under the law, a hefty fine would have been imposed when the company was unable to do this. So this scenario, albeit a little bit fabricated, as in a little bit contrived, does highlight the nature of the challenges that arise in this space, and really when there was no malintent by any of the actors involved. There's a challenge of being safe by design, because there are all these competing considerations from different disciplinary perspectives, whether that's the law or the notion of online harm and technical capabilities of software tools, to the fact that it's a fast-moving environment and so on. So, the challenges to ensure safe by design, we think are fivefold. So one is that there is limited understanding of the links between online harms and digital product features. So as a developer, there isn't a kind of authoritative source that you could refer to, a design space or a design catalog that says, if you're introducing this type of feature into your product, then you need to be aware of these potential online harms against women and girls, specifically or more generally to the wider population, that you need to be thinking about and mitigating. Similarly, there might be some design features which, if you include, would enhance online safety, and therefore you should be pointed towards those in order to be able to include them. There's also a lack of knowledge about these multidisciplinary requirements. So as we've highlighted, some of the requirements for this system came from legislation, some of it would have come from the user policy, some of it came from end users and the developers' knowledge about the constraints of different solutions. Another challenge is that this is a very dynamic operating environment. The software itself is changing, sometimes in ways that are not controlled by the developers themselves. So modern software is a very complicated hierarchy of dependencies with lots of third-party tools being integrated into it, and developers may not always be aware of all the updates that are being made to those third-party components when they choose to update their software. Similarly, the law is changing, and the way in which people use technology changes as well. So all of this makes it a very challenging space. We also don't have good ways of sharing knowledge and good practice about what works in terms of protecting online safety, what might be risky and why, and so on. And finally, we don't have ways of demonstrating this due diligence of that. Ultimately, it's very hard to give absolute assurances about online safety, similar to our inability to give absolute assurances about security in the cybersecurity domain. But the next best thing is to be able to demonstrate that and use systematic processes that try to map out the risks and adequately mitigate those risks to the best of the ability of the people involved. So our idea here is to think about ways of capturing this knowledge of how harms and product features and societal factors like legislation and policy and the various actors involved could be related. So this is a kind of first stab at this. So the idea that an online harm is associated with harm incidents that take place in a particular context, and each harm incident could have two or more actors. There's a victim, a perpetrator, but there could also be actors like observers and allies. And then harms can also have associated with them what we call inhibitors and enablers. So inhibitors are things that would mitigate that harm from occurring, and enablers are things, as the name suggests, enable it or make the likelihood of that harm becoming a harm incident more possible. And these enablers are associated with both, with product features, and inhibitors could be societal factors like legislation and policy, but also could come from the design space of the product features themselves. And so our hypothesis is that this model could be used to help developers identify the harms that could be enabled or inhibited, identify different legislative requirements, so trying to address that multidisciplinary aspect of this problem space. So to capture the relationship between the entities and the ways online harms change over time by having fields that record things like the dates of a software release, the validity period of legislation, and so on. So we are able to track how this knowledge space changes, to share good practice and understanding of how to inhibit online harms using different social and technical mechanisms. And then the final challenge of acting as a model, a way to capture in a structured way the documentation about how product features were chosen to reduce the likelihood of online harms. So that's one piece of work that we're developing, and not just as part of thinking about the future of responsible technology, but broadly across the whole center, working together across all the different work streams to try and think about how we could represent this knowledge in a useful and meaningful way to all the different areas that are involved and interested in making online spaces safer for women and girls. And the broad way we're approaching this is thinking about two aspects of building better software, which involves thinking about features of software that could improve the way that these systems are safer for women. And so some of the things we've been looking at, for example, are how we could design effective warning labels for deepfake content. So this is some work with a collaborator based in Sri Lanka that we did, and we came up with a design space, a candidate design space for these deepfake warning labels, and designed a whole set of warning label prototypes based on examples that we see being put into practice today. And we did an online study to look at which design is most effective, how it affected people's perception that content was fake, and how it affected their trust of those warnings. And what we found was one of the key things was actually attaching any label to content increases the likelihood that people will conclude that it's fake, even if it's real. And so this highlights an important consideration that we need to get the accuracy of our deepfake detection techniques as high as possible, because if we get to a point where we're automatically labeling content as potentially fake, we might mislabel content and therefore degrade trust of people who are consuming that content. We've also been looking in the context of better software, ways in which we can design software that promotes pro-social behaviors. So this stems from work before the center was established that we did, and we built this platform called Gratitude Tree. So this was an online space where people could, we used the metaphor of a tree and adding leaves to a tree with messages of gratitude on them. So this is something we came up with during the COVID pandemic, and inspired by people expressing gratitude publicly by standing on their doorsteps and clapping for NHS and key workers. And we thought, if we created a platform where people could do this digitally, what would that experience be like? And we kind of organically, we didn't really launch this in a big way. There wasn't a lot of marketing, but we found people use it quite a lot. And until we had to take the site down last year, it was being used significantly. And what prior studies show is that this type of gratitude expression can help well-being and enhance pro-social behavior. But most of those previous studies look at personal gratitude interventions, people recording things in journals, rather than doing it in public for wide consumption. What's also interesting is that this platform was entirely anonymous. So people could post these messages without having to register. We weren't tracking their usage of it using any cookies, and we were very clear about that. And so the only identities you see are when people choose to name themselves or others in the gratitude messages that they post. And so what's interesting is this is kind of counterintuitive to that notion that anonymity breeds violence and breeds hateful speech, because when the framing is one of expressing gratitude, we found we didn't have to moderate any of the content on this tree. I mean, there were some nonsense posts. I think we had some bots trying to just post random text, but everything else was entirely in line with the idea of expressing gratitude. So this is kind of really interesting to explore how we could, by framing something with positive prompts when people engage online, whether that could make people think more positively and therefore avoid hateful or harmful posts. The other aspect is about building software better. So this is about how we can enhance the software engineering methods and processes we use to help developers build software that is safer for women and girls. And we're thinking about ways of helping people recognize online harm. So that's where the ontology work I just described fits in. Building on notions of kind computing. If we try to embed values like kindness into the design process, how does that affect the software and the features to improve online safety? And at the heart of this, I think, are design thinking techniques. So having techniques that allow developers to have empathy for their end users and understand their context, we think will make a big difference. So these are some of the things we're exploring. And so in that context, we're trying to see, how do we help developers think about the guardrails for preventing these online harms? And we're building on work we did previously looking at secure development practice. So when there was a kind of oft quoted kind of statement, as if it was fact, that the reason software security issues happen, cybersecurity issues happen, is that a lot of software is built by people who don't care about security. But when we did some ethnographic studies of developers in professional contexts, what we found is they care hugely about security and they have the skills to do it, and they do it whenever they can. But actually, there are much more complex organizational and economic considerations in the ecosystem of software development that sometimes means that security isn't given the attention that it needs. And in this work, we developed various ways of trying to empower and motivate, empower by understanding the motivation of software developers, empower them to think about and engage in security practice, secure software development practice. We've also looked at ways in which guidelines can help technology designers and developers. So this was in the prior work, was to help Internet of Things applications embed privacy features more actively. And so these are things we'll be building on as we do the work in protecting women online. And then finally, we're also kind of curious to see, can we develop ways to help some types of software simply not being built in the first place? Are there ways we can systematically evaluate risks and get agreement on simply not building software because the harms outweigh the benefits? And at the moment, that simply doesn't happen because, and that's how we've ended up with some of the products that Miri highlighted, for example, like the nudification deep learning algorithm software. Now, after the backlash, that software was taken down by the developers. But maybe they shouldn't have developed it, not maybe, actually, absolutely they shouldn't have developed it in the first place. But there was no way to build that consensus and prevent that from happening. And so we're inspired by this book by Rob Kitchen and Alistair Fraser called Slow Computing, in which they're really advocating for having a more evaluative and reflective approach to software development and design, in considering the sovereignty of users in terms of their attention and data, and giving users more control over their online presence and experiences. So that was a whistle-stop tour through the work that we're doing. I'm going to hand back to Miri now to go through our last few slides.
Yeah, no, this is just a summary for all of you. As we mentioned at the beginning, the center is a beautiful initiative, and it's not just us working at the center. There is people from psychology. So there is Rose, there is Lisa, there is Olga from law. There is a wealth of knowledge, on how we could target this problem from different perspectives. The center is very open. We have an international visiting fellowship scheme. We have visitors that will start arriving in 2025. We are recruiting PhD students. There is one opening until the 28th of March for people who have like a STEM or computing background as well. So if there is any of your students that you think would like to start a PhD student with us, please redirect them to the ad is in the website of the center. We will be more than happy to consider any students. And then, we have more information will come on internships and fellowships. And if you have in mind any organization that you think it would be worth for us to, to talk to or to bring into the center, just please let us know, because as you have already seen, this is a massive problem. And the more hands that we have, and the more experience that we have, and the more connections that we have to try to target this issue, the better. So it would be fantastic if, in X years' time, we can really show the impact that a center like, the Center for Protecting Women Online can have. So in terms of priorities, I'm going to go through this very briefly. So these are the two streams that we have been discussing today. In terms of the one I was talking about, we have two main priorities. One, identifying the impact of AI on society. So I was discussing the hate and how it impacts women online, the bias, the deep fakes, and so on. And then whether existing technology is being built with the necessary, responsible AI lens, let's put it this way, because, if you are not careful, again, you have some potential side effects. And technology these days is being built too fast and too careless sometimes. And then, the stream that Arosha was mentioning has two priorities, as he already mentioned. One is building software better, and the other one is building better software. And then, that's all from our side. If you have questions, that we will be more than happy to answer them. If you want to join us, we'll be more than happy to receive you at the center. So thank you, everyone, for listening today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Miri, as well.
Thank you very much. Lots of applause and hearts swelling on the screen. I can relate to this. It's been very, very interesting. Sometimes quite hard to fathom, isn't it, what's happening? But it's great to see that there's so many approaches and thoughts going into how we could change that. Thank you, both of you, Miriam and Arosha. I'm going to close that session, which was very insightful, I think, and a good discussion as well. Thank you again. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you, panel. That was brilliant. Thank you.